Today, we are doing a deep dive into the unsettling realities and consequences surrounding high school relationships, minor intimacies, and the online world where legal boundaries blur and decisions have profound lifelong implications. Welcome to the Cook Who Can't Eat podcast, where chronic illness and family meet at home and in the kitchen. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad that you're here. Talking through this whole legal conversation with you has been really interesting. When you lay it all out there and you look at it all at once, or even in these three big chunks, it gets overwhelming. It's almost scary to think that that's the world we're raising our kids in. Today in part 3, we're going to talk about that high school love, that high school romance, and that intimacy with and between minors. As much as we all hope that our kids are always going to make the right decisions, and whatever our personal beliefs or values are, we hope that our kids follow that example. But as parents, we also have to realize that sometimes our kids make a decision without really understanding what the consequences can really be. In 2011, a 14-year-old, since he's a minor, he just goes by the initials JL, engaged in a consensual sexual relationship with his then 12-year-old girlfriend, who was only 15 months his minor. He was charged and convicted of first-degree rape, and according to the South Dakota Supreme Court, consensual sex between minors can actually result in more strict punishment and penalties than non-consensual sex between adults. That minor's conviction almost always includes being required to register on the sex offender list for life. And whether he is 18 or 81, description of his crime will be first-degree rape of a 12-year-old. At no point will it add the qualifiers that he was 14 at the time, that it was consensual, or that they were only 15 months apart. The CDC estimates that by the 9th grade, 30% of girls and 40% of boys have already had sex. And when age of consent or age difference falls outside of a state's regulation, even if both parties consent, the charges and the convictions can carry severe sentences because the victim is a minor. Can you imagine what it would be like to have your child on the sex offender registry list? It's a public registry that includes their photograph, their home address, and a description of their crime. Think about JL. That description will follow him no matter what his age is, and there will never be a qualifier that explains the situation. Of the approximately 750,000 people that are arrested every year, 200,000 of them are minors. A 2018 study actually found that minors on the sex offender registry are 5 times more likely to be approached by an adult for sex than a non-registered minor. And they're 4 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts. 2% of juvenile registrants have reported threats of violence against them. Others have described things like drive-by shootings, even beloved family pets being killed and left on their porch. A man tracked down a registered 10-year-old and held a shotgun to their head. In 2012, a female registrant reported that random men would call her house asking to hook up with her. Can you imagine that? Can you even wrap your head around what that would mean for your child? A few years ago, we came home to a notice, or really more of an invitation, on our front door. A registered sex offender was moving into the area, and he was required to notify a certain radius. This notice included all the legally required information, introduced himself and his family, and explained why he was hosting an open house. He wanted to present the community with the opportunity to meet him and his family, ask them questions, and view any and all of the court documents. What we learned was that he was required to register as a sex offender because of the relationship he had with his high school girlfriend, who is now his wife and mother to their 2 children. At this point, they were in their late 30s, and this was still haunting them. Everywhere they went, everyone they met, anytime their kids had school activities, this became an issue. There are strict guidelines and rules that all registered sex offenders must follow, even if they're minors. Some states allow juvenile registration to start at age 7.
44% of sex offenders, including the minors, are unable to live at home with their families due to residency restrictions. So if they have younger siblings or they live too close to a school, they can't live there any longer. Can you imagine your 7, 8, maybe even 12-year-old no longer being able to live at home with you? A lot of these registered minors end up being forced into foster care or group homes, even though states are passing more and more laws to keep sex offenders out of foster homes and out of group homes. Some states have laws that require minors to attend school while also forbidding sex offenders from being anywhere near the school. So how do you get your child their education? In Texas, Frank Rodriguez pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting a child because he was having an intimate relationship with his 15-year-old girlfriend, Nikki Prescott. One night, Nikki and her mom got into a huge argument, and to make a point, her mom went to the police station and reported their intimate relationship. Now, in the past, the parents had always been very supportive and really liked Frank. The next day, when tempers had cooled off, she went to the police department trying to retract her statement. However, she was told it was too late. They would be moving forward with prosecution. The police interrogated Nikki, forced her to write a statement, and then they forced her to submit to a rape examination. Nikki's statement and her interviews clearly stated that the intimacy was consensual, usually at her insistence, and in no way, shape, or form was it any type of rape. His plea bargain kept him out of jail, but required him to register as a sex offender for life. His name, picture, and personal information are on the registry with people like Wesley Wayne Miller, who murdered a high school cheerleader, and Larry Don McQuay, who molested more than 200 children. As a term of his probation, Frank was ordered to stay away from his victim, Nikki, and anyone else under the age of 17. He had to move out of his family home because of his 12-year-old younger sister. He lived in a small trailer and was forced to get his GED because he was no longer allowed to attend school. He struggled to find a job that would take someone that had been convicted as a sex offender. The day Nikki turned 17, she moved in with Frank, and they've been together ever since. However, this is still a huge part of their life. He couldn't take his own kids to the park or playground because other children would be there. He couldn't technically live in the house with his young children and his wife, and had to get special permission to be able to pick up his own kids from daycare. To this day, Frank is still a registered sex offender, and there is no disclaimer or comment that the relationship was consensual and that he too was a minor. The laws are in place for a reason, and even with them, so much evil still falls through the cracks. No one wants their kid to be a victim or a perpetrator, and as much as I wish we could just tell all the kids, hey, just don't do anything until you're 18. The reality is, and the CDC agrees, that they're already being intimate, and those numbers are trending upwards. In my research for this episode, I found some really bizarre ways that someone could end up on the sex offender registry list. I'll post a more thorough list on my website, but I want to share 4 that really threw me for a loop. The first one is flashing or indecent exposure. And I get it, and I'm not talking about the creepy guy with the trench coat doing horrible things. I'm talking about, like, have you ever been on a road trip where the car driving past you is suddenly mooning you or maybe flashing you? Those actions can actually cause someone to end up on the sex offender registry. The second one was public urination. Now, I know that's a no-no, and I always kind of thought of it more of a misdemeanor or a community service ticket fine type situation. But apparently, it can put you on the sex offender registry. I don't think I know anyone that hasn't had to pop a squat behind a rock on a hike or stop on the side of the road during a really long car ride, or maybe even hide in a dark corner after a late night out. So if you decide to do any of that, be careful, because depending on what state you live in, you could end up a sex offender. The third one was watching pornography where minors or others could see it. Why is this law not enforced or used more often? I cannot count the number of flights where some guy is sitting there watching porn on his iPad or laptop with his headphones in. If your kids want to explore with magazines or iPads or computers or videos on their phone, just make sure they know where not to do that. I'm really not sure how they would explain, or anyone could explain really, to a future boss or significant other that they are a registered sex offender because they wanted to watch porn in a public place. It's the fourth one that really threw me for a loop. Hugging. Yep, hugging. The way it was described was the hugging has to be non-consensual and repetitive to become a sex crime, but it can land you on the sex offender registry for life. We have always told our kids that if they think they are mature enough and ready to have an intimate relationship with someone, then they need to make sure that they are mature enough and ready to understand what the laws are, how they're applied, why they're there, and why they are so important. We talk to our kids about age of consent, age different, things that can land them on the sex offender registry, and a whole lot more. Because having these conversations and sharing some of these real life stories helps them be vigilant and safe. Did you know that the buying and selling of people is the second largest criminal trade in the world, and that it's also the fastest growing? At any one time, there's approximately 21 million people being trafficked, 79% for sexual exploitation, 30% of them are children, and 72% of those are underage girls that are on average 13 years old, but they're seeing victims as young as 4. The cost to traffic a human being for an entire year is $90, while a pimp or someone who is trafficking them can make $150,000 to $200,000 per year per victim. Let's do some basic math. If there are 21 million people being trafficked, and 79% are being trafficked for sexual exploitation, that's about 16.6 million individuals. If 30% of them are minors, that's about 5 million. And if 72% of them are underage girls, that's about 3.6 million girls being trafficked for sexual exploitation. The cost to traffic all of them is about $322 million a year. But what they're making off of them, if we split the difference between that 150 to 200,000, they are making $627 billion a year. So if you take what they're making and subtract those expenses, you're now talking $626.8 billion from those 3.6 million victims. What breaks my heart is that despite all of our attention to this and our laws, 52% of the people being trafficked are from the United States, and they represent every single state. 72% of the US citizens that are trafficked are used for sexual exploitation. It's sad and it's heartbreaking. It's so hard to comprehend all of this and to try and figure out what the solution would be, because once someone's sold or bought and traded, it can be almost impossible to find them. Female minors that are trafficked for exploitation, 76% of those victims were lured from their online activity and conversations with people they thought they knew. Once these victims are ready, 75% of their sales and bookings are all done through online advertising. It's not uncommon for sex trafficking victims to be able to walk away or leave after a couple years, but traffickers are often able to keep them there. Usually they have them very addicted to some kind of drug at that point, and they have them so mentally beaten and manipulated that it's easy for them to convince these girls that if they leave, no one's ever going to love them. They also drive home the point that you can leave, but none of this will ever be gone. We will forever own you. We will forever follow you. Most of what they've done, these traffickers load online and will follow these girls the rest of their life. Victims by this point are so traumatized, and they're torn between their desire to run and their fear of running, that a lot of them take their own life. Our laws are there, but they're not perfect, and a lot of evil sneaks through. That is one thing that our kids have to understand. If they think they can be intimate, they have to understand that those laws that are there to protect these victims also apply to them. You don't get to pick and choose what laws you follow. Now, whether it's Life 360, which, by the way, is awesome, you really should go look it up. It's not just a great alibi, but it's a godsend if you have new drivers or you just want to make sure that your kid's getting from point A to point B safely. As we talked about before, it's also a great way to shut down any potential false allegations. Whether it's that or something else, you have to find a way to protect your kids from others and themselves. Now, a lot of this message may get lost on your kids and they might start to tune some things out. Just like in the first and second part, I'm going to break this down to the 5 things that you want them to know by the end of this legal talk. Number 1, when both people are minors, age of consent and age difference can make the relationship a crime. Those guidelines or restrictions are set at the state level and do vary state by state. Number 2, a sexual offense against a minor carries severe punishment and almost always means a life on the sex offender registry, even if the crime was consensual or committed by a minor. Number 3, being a registered sex offender will alter your entire life, including where you can live, your education, your ability to date or get married, how you're able to raise your kids, and even what jobs you can and cannot apply for. Number 4, stay vigilant about your surroundings, the people in your life, and your online activity. Thanks to the internet, anyone can be anyone. You don't know who's on the other end of that keyboard, and you definitely don't know what their real intentions are. Number 5, do whatever you have to do to keep your family safe, whether it's an app or rules or enforcing actions and behaviors that support good character and teach them to be safe and vigilant. Now, they may not always like it, but I can guarantee you they're going to like that a lot more than the alternative. Technology is changing so fast. And even when we try to immerse ourselves in that world, it can feel impossible to keep up with. So stop trying to keep up with the latest online platform, app, AI, internet, crazy thing, whatever. Instead, focus on your kid. Educate them on the dangers of an online life, on the laws that both protect and apply to them, on the difference between love and lust, on the reality that there is no way to truly know who is behind a keyboard and their intentions. Instead of fighting monsters that we can't see, we need to double down on our kids. Make sure they are becoming good humans in person and online. If we focus on educating and preparing our kids, they are going to be safer on any new app or platform or technology or whatever that comes along. We only get 18 years to raise our kids to be good humans, and it is not enough time. The legal talk is something we didn't have growing up, wasn't necessary. Sexting didn't exist. Intimate relationships between consenting minors were rarely taken to court. Sex offenders weren't kids that stupidly sent a sexual picture of themselves. They were adults doing unthinkable things to children. All this connectivity has not only made the world a smaller place, it now includes an internet that never forgets. Our kids need to know speed limits and curfews and everything in between, because there is real risk that it's one choice, one decision, one wrong step can ruin everything before it ever really begins. As parents, that's the last thing we want for our kids.
Thank you for being here, my friend. This probably feels overwhelming and like uncharted territory, because for most of us it is. But the legal talk is a conversation you will never regret having with your kids. Next week is the newly added part 4 of the legal talk. Words can break as violently as sticks and stones. We see and deal with keyboard warriors every day, but our kids experience it on a level most of us can't imagine. The problem is that our kids aren't understanding that what they say online or in text or as an image can have consequences. Everyone likes to stand up and scream First Amendment, but they don't realize that there are still limitations to that, like yelling fire in a crowded area or threatening to unalive someone in the chat forum on a video game. Join me on socials for extra content, recipes, podcasts, podcast sneak peeks, and more. Don't forget to subscribe so you know as soon as that next episode is available. In the meantime, take care of yourself, my friend. I'll see you next week. Accessibility matters, so every podcast episode is available on your favorite platform and as a video with captions on YouTube.